Next we are going to talk about transforms. When you do generated content and you top, left, bottom, right, all equals 0. So this div right here is the exact same size as this div. It's generated content, and I made it equal the exact same size by doing that. And so during this deck, I will be transforming this one with a slightly blue corner. The original is the gray, so you can see where it was and where it is now and what size it is now. So we are animating a plane, or transforming rather a plane. So here, this is the actual syntax that I would be using. I translated it 90 degrees to the left, 300 pixels down. I rotated this by 50 degrees, and I scaled it 70% width, 90% height. And then I skewed it. And that makes no sense to you now, but in 5 minutes it will. So we have 2D transform, two-dimensional transforms, which are translate, or translate XY, which means move to the left or right or top to bottom. Then we have scale, which means scale either proportionally or just the X or just the Y. You can rotate X or you can rotate Y. You can skew. And then the last thing is matrix. And I will not cover matrix, but I will explain what matrix is. Matrix is computer generated usually. There are humans that can do it. They're not really human. They only pretend to be human. Cyborgs. And I know the name of a few of those cyborgs. They do exist. But they'll come up with 6 values. So when you see matrix in the code, at least you know what they're talking about. But if someone comes in for a job interview and they say so they hand-coded it and you see the word matrix, you know that they're full of BS. Okay. So here I translated this 100 pixels from the top and 100 pixels from the left. That didn't take, so I'll just do it here. 200 pixels. It is not taking. Let's reload the page. Wow. That's not going to be fun if this deck doesn't work. That's weird. Okay. I'm just going to refresh one more time. And try it again. Okay. I'm going to just go on to the next slide and see if I can't translate this, I'm going to go into the inspector. Okay. I need to do this via inspector. I have no clue why it is no longer working. It was working. Okay, so the cool thing is with generated content, you have to find the original element, then you have to find the generated content on it, and you just move it. So here we have translate 100, and we are going to increase it by 110, and you see that I'm translating the Y. Just look over here instead of over there. I could have also translated the X, made it negative. It's all good. I'm just going to look in here and see if there's a reason why it's not working. Pointer events none. That should be fine. Okay, I have no clue why it's not working. But I could also do translate X and just do the value of 230. And so it's over here. It just made it to push it to the right. And I can also push it to the left with a negative number. So that's kind of self-explanatory. You guys understand that? Is that big enough for you guys to read on the right? Okay. So sorry that I have to do it this way. There's JavaScript in these to make it understand instead of the other way that I was doing it. And for some reason, the JavaScript is failing me. So rotate 90 degrees is interesting, because if I rotate it Y 90 degrees, you actually don't see it. You see how that border is gray instead of blue? Because when you rotate paper 90 degrees, what do you see? So that's what's happening. So 80 degrees, you see how it's popping back in? And then negative 80 degrees. It's just going to go in the other direction. So negative 180. It's just backwards. I can also rotate it Y that way. Oh, I did rotate Y. Let's rotate it X that way. So the only way you can tell that there's actually difference, because I flipped it 180 and it's the same on the top and the bottom, is that the shadow is now on the top instead of the bottom. Because when I rotated it 0 degrees, you see where the shadow is? So that's the only way you can tell. So rotating this way, 90 degrees. So this is rotate, just simple rotate. This is rotate X, and this is rotate Y. Make sense? Okay, let's go on to skewing. No, scaling. So here it's 25% by 75%. So it's 25% of the width and 75% of the height. I'm actually going to just try this in my other Chrome and see maybe if it works in my other Chrome, because it was working and it's really frustrating that it's not. I have no clue what happened. Okay, there must be a typo in my JavaScript. Console. It's not giving me an error, so I don't know what's going on. Okay, so let's scale this. The after, so it's scaled. So if we scale just one value, it makes it proportional. So that is 25%. 25% along the X and the Y. And generally that's what you'll want to do, because you don't want to scale things in one direction. It distorts it. So if you don't want to distort, you just scale down. So when I say scale down, you don't really want to scale up, because if you scale like 3, this is actually a font. So this is a character from the character set from that copy-paste character. So it's scaled up fine, but generally it will, if you have a JPEG, it'll just become really ugly. So what you want is to always scale down instead of scaling up. This is not a good example of showing that, but that's the general idea. So if I scale just in one direction, it made it 3.25 times as wide, but 100% as tall. If I had said Y instead of X, we would have gotten height instead of width. Does it make scaling? Everyone understand scaling? Okay. We will move on to skewing. So here I've skewed X. When you skew X, it basically means keep the top and the bottom parallel to the way they were, and skew the left and right. If you skew, let's just find it here. If you skew Y, it does the exact opposite, if you can get in there. The left and right are parallel, the top and bottom. So it's skewing the actual plane. And if I was doing a plane flying, skewing would look really good, because that's actually what it would look like when it's flying towards you. But you can also use perspective later on, which we'll cover. So that's skew. You can skew X and Y at the same time, this way, with two separate values, with space separated. Or you can just do skew. If you only do one value, it's X, but if you do two values, it's not working. Oh, because there's no comma. So that skews both of them. So that's skew. I've never used skew in production, just wanted to show you what it does, but I've never actually used it. Multiple transforms. So here we have said translate this -80 and 200 pixels from the top. We already understand that, right? We've rotated it 15 degrees. Now we know what that means. We've scaled it 1.5 along the x-axis and two times along the y-axis. You guys understand what that means? And we've skewed it, right? But we didn't actually do this, because what would happen if we wrote these 4 declarations?
And replace each other?
Yeah, they would overwrite each other, because I'm using the exact same property. So what you do is you space separate them in one declaration. You still have to put the WebKit prefix or whatever prefix in front of them. I think the reason that this deck might not be working is because you notice I didn't prefix anything, because I used prefix free. And I assume that it's my prefix free that's not coming through. Prefix free is a JavaScript library by Leah Veru, and what it does is it just automatically detects whether you need prefixes and adds them. And I think the script just didn't come through. It's actually a very nice script, but I only use it for presentations, because I don't use it for production. Because in production it's JavaScript, so you'll first you first want to load all your CSS, and none of it will work until you get the style of that flicker, and then it'll style it. So anyway, that is 2D transforms. That is all there is to 2D transforms. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just remember, space separate it when you have multiple values. So I always put little hints at the end. So vendor prefix, all of them. When you transform it, it creates a new stacking context. So it doesn't actually keep it in its place and move it. It kind of lifts it out and moves it. So if there's text around it, it goes right over it. You saw that in this example where the plane is underneath something, right? I'll show you what transform origin means. Multiple values are space separated. 3D transforms are generally hardware accelerated. Sometimes 2D transforms are also. So let's play with it. So go to slide 12 and play along. And just, if I do 90 degrees, you really can't see anything, right? But if I'd done 40 degrees, you'd be able to see it. If I translate it 200 pixels, you might notice. If I skew it, when it's now looking like a diamond, and scale it, let's just do it 10 times and make it take up the whole page. But notice that it overwrote the text, right? It didn't push anything out of the way. It basically gave it a new styling, a new context. So when you have something like this in line, and you translate it 200 pixels, it'll be either behind the text or in front of the text, depending on whether you move it, what the z-index is, or the source order rather. But it will not move the text out of the way, and the original area taken up by that box will still be there. So have you guys played with it and you've had fun? Okay, so transform origin property. So transform origin, everything we've done so far, when we've rotated this, let's just go back to 1 here. When I rotated it, let's get rid of the translation. And this. When I rotated it, it just always around the center, right? See how it's just moving around the center? That's the default origin of. By default, everything will rotate around its middle point, but that's boring. So the next slide, we're going to rotate around this point right here. So that we do that with transform origin. It takes us either the key terms or length values or percentage values. The default is 50-50. And every browser that supports transforms does support transform origin. So here, we have rotated this 230 degrees, but we put bottom right as its transform property. So again, remember when I was telling you 0, 0? This is positioned absolutely. And so it's right on top because I use top 0, bottom 0, right 0, left 0. So you see how it takes up that whole space? And if I translate it 10 pixels, right? It's moving over a teeny bit. I just want to prove that point. But now that I've proved that point, transform origin bottom right, as I rotate it, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 40 degrees, 90 degrees, 110 degrees. Oops, that's 1,100. You see how the bottom corner is always touching? I rotated it 180 degrees around this point. So if I take these two pieces of paper, right, this is the original, and I rotate it around this point. So I hold this point here, and I just drop it, right? It's just going to do that, and that's basically what it's doing. 270, let's try it with 270. 290. You got the point of transform origin? Okay. So then we have translate 3D properties. The only thing to really know about this is that when you translate something into its 3D space, it really won't look any different because the Z is closer to you, but it's still on the page and you haven't given it perspective. But what it does do when you're animating is hardware accelerate it. So when you're animating it, it puts it onto the GPU and takes it off of the CPU, and it performs, it just looks so much better. So let's just look at perspective here. So when you apply perspective to the parent element, the smaller the number, the closer the element is, and the larger the number, the further it is away. So if we actually do like 100 or 10, that's because we're doing this. We're looking at this piece of paper at this point like this. So it looks really huge. And then we're looking at it like this, and it gets smaller and smaller the further it is away. So, right? So it's basically where are we looking at it from? And so that's WebKit perspective. And then we have back face visibility. So let's say we have a deck of, or a phone. We have a phone. It's a div, and it has a front of a phone and a back of a phone. But the source order is always the back is going to be front first if that's how we declared it, right? We can't change the source order. So if I were to flip the phone, the back would still be on top. So you can do back face visibility hidden. And so when something is flipped away from you 180 degrees, you don't see it. So we just toggle it on and off, which this is a dumb example. I'll show you later a better example.